on the internet, so I got to get your attention. Hello. Good morning. I'm sure some people will wander in as we talk, but I want to go ahead and get started as close to on time as possible. Our online audience continues to grow, which is awesome. So hi out there. We also set up a couple of things that I want to talk to you about, but first I want to introduce myself. My name is Cami Huiza, and I am the organizer of Social Media Breakfast of Houston. You can follow me at CamiChat, K-A-M-I-C-H-A-T. I have the speakers up here on the screen, so make sure you tweet about them with their handles, and we'll be talking a little bit about that in a minute and using the SNDHOU hashtag. So I've been told I didn't say that ever, so I'm trying to do that first. So trying to be a little bit better host. Anyway, I'm very excited today because we're going to have a really interesting discussion around the idea of international social media and how it's used by the Consular Corps here in Houston. I have some really special guests here. First of all, on my left is Karen Newman. All right, just say Newman or Nauman?
I'll answer anything.
But what did you say? Nauman. Okay, excuse me. So Karen Nauman is a regular at Social Media Breakfast, so you may have seen her around here. But she serves as Communication and Digital Diplomacy Officer for Israel's Ministry of Foreign Affairs at the Consul General of Israel to the Southwest United States. That is a mouthful. I'm so glad I do not have that title. But anyway, she does, and it's a very interesting job, which you can imagine. We'll talk a little bit more about it during this hour. Next to her on the left is Sujiro Seam, and he is the Consul General of France in Houston. He came in 2013, so he is a Houstonian and lives here with all the rest of us crazies. And he represents France here in Houston. So we're really excited to have both of these people here. They have some great insights. We had a call ahead of this, and I'm really excited to share with you what they've shared with me. So starting right off, I want to talk about the Consular Corps in Houston because I know that that's actually, we have somebody here from the Consular Corps in Houston. And I want to talk a little bit about that. Can you, Karen, kind of just start that since you're to my left and tell us a little bit about, I know, you can sit it again too. You can. But we have a pretty interesting Consular Corps here in Houston that might be surprising for some people.
We have one of the largest consular corps in the country here in Houston. I think a lot of people don't realize that.
Is it close enough?
Yeah.
So I'll actually let the Consul General speak more on that topic.
Thank you very much. First of all, bonjour. So you see, whenever I appear someone, a miracle happens. Everybody suddenly speaks French. I know you're cheating, Karen, because you really speak French. But no, the Consular Corps here in Houston, we have the largest in the nation. So I know we're only the fourth largest city in the United States of America, but the city of Houston owns the third largest Consular Corps in the country. I think we are a little bit short of 40 career consuls, which means foreign diplomats accredited to the United States of America, and we do that for a living. And in addition to that, we have nearly 60 honorary consuls who are citizens of the United States of America or the country they serve, or another country, and they do that on a voluntary basis. But all together, we render the same services to our respective communities. We serve them. We represent the country for which we wear the flag. So I have mine here, Karen has hers. And our third mission, I would say, is to really encourage cooperations between the country we represent and the United States of America in all possible fields. So you would understand, of course, that Houston being Houston, economy, trade, investment, business would be a high priority, but not only. We are also very active in the field of education, culture, science, technology. So that's what we do with the Consular Corps.
So as part of that, they have robust communication plans, as you can imagine. How many of you here do any kind of international communication or have an international audience? A couple here? Okay, good. So we have, about 25% of the room have an international kind of reach. But one of the things that I thought was very interesting about when Karen came to me with this idea is that you have to almost be prepared for anything whenever you represent a country in another country, right? So anything could happen. So you have to be ready for that. So one of the questions I asked them, and I'll ask again, is who do you represent through your social media channels in this case, because that's what we're going to talk about today. And sort of how do you look at the role of the consulate in Houston through your communications?
So our role, we have a 5-state region. We're for the South United States, although we're based in Houston. That includes Louisiana, Arkansas, Texas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico. So we are to represent Israel in the United States in those 5 states is primarily our geographic range. And as far as who do we speak to? We speak to various audience online. A lot of people are obviously our American people that are interested in Israel or have a tie to Israel in some way, but we also have people from Israel or Israelis here that or follow us, and we have a very robust outreach to the various audiences already mentioned, and that also includes Spanish speakers as well.
Thank you very much. Our target audience is really twofold. We try to reach out to the French people, either here in the jurisdiction I cover, and I have a smaller territory. I only have Texas, Arkansas, and Oklahoma, which is already twice as big as France. With a little bit short of half the population, though. So the French people here or in France, and all the people who would be interested in French affairs, most particularly here in the US. And that begs the question of the language we use, and you alluded to that already. So we post most of the times in both languages, French and English, when the media allows that. So we do that on Facebook, we do that on Instagram. On Twitter, unfortunately, we have to choose, because if we start translating everything in both languages, we're only down to 70 characters, and it's going to be short to communicate.
So you also, let's talk about the language in your case too, since we're on language, Karen. So do you guys ever post in Hebrew? I mean, what do you post? What is your language choice?
We receive information in Hebrew often. Can you indulge me 1 second? I want to acknowledge one of the Israeli consulate staff that's here, Lisa Bourgeois. So Lee, I really want to tell you that especially when it's in crisis time, which involves the Middle East, it has a crisis every once in a while. She is just a lifesaver in helping me survive and get everything done that needs to be done online and otherwise. So we communicate primarily in English, but because of the region we're in the United States, we have a robust Spanish outreach online, as well as we have a Spanish page online. Honestly, we don't have that many Hebrew speakers in the general public, but what we do have is we have a special group called Israeli House, and that's for Israelis that are here. All of those communications and emails are sent out in Hebrew for them. A lot of the programs are conducted in Hebrew for them.
We don't communicate in Hebrew.
That's good to know.
And we don't really communicate in Spanish either. So really we use 2 languages, French and English, or I should say English and French in that order, because of course we're in the US, and most of our people, including the French people who are not very gifted at foreign languages, they manage to follow us in English here in this part of the nation. Really it depends on the kind of messages we want to send, and I think we will have the opportunity to look in depth at this issue.
So speaking of social media, can you tell us what channels you're using for social media, and which ones are you finding the most effective right now, and how much engagement are you getting through your channels and that kind of thing? So can you just kind of run through the different channels you're using, how you're using them, and like which one is probably the most important to you?
So we use Twitter, Facebook, Google+, Instagram, Pinterest. We have a Vine account. Am I missing any, Lisa? YouTube channel. Primarily, we use Twitter and Facebook, as probably a lot of you do. We do house and store our videos on YouTube, so whether we would push that out on another media, it kind of resides on YouTube. Google Plus is just there because, like a lot of us, we just feel like we should have a Google Plus account. I'm not sure why, what the ultimate purpose of it is. If you could riddle me that, let me know. Instagram, Instagram is a great repository for all of our photographs as well.
Well, you also use Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We have a YouTube channel. But the interesting thing to mention, maybe, in my case, is that we have an official account for Twitter, for Facebook, and for Instagram, which is the consulate's account. And it's maintained by my staff. So I have, like you or Karen, I have a press and communication and public relation officers at the consulate. So they are the ones who feed our Twitter account, our Facebook account, our Instagram account. And in addition to that, I have my personal accounts, and I feed them myself. So if you get a reply from me, it's a reply from me. It's not a reply from my press or communication or PR officer. And we do that very often, and it's a policy of the French Foreign Affairs. On the one hand, to share official news, official positions, but really, if people want to follow what's going on in France, they don't have to follow us. They would follow directly the account of the respective institutions or organizations in France. And we have a personal series of accounts which gives a more personal view, a lighter view, sometimes a funny view, because institutional communication is very rarely really funny or entertaining. So we have this lighter version of public diplomacy, which I do myself personally with my own personal accounts.
I'd like to add that we too, on all those platforms, have what I call multiple personas. We have a cultural Facebook, because we have not as rich probably as France, but we do have a rich cultural outreach in the Southwest United States. All things cultural are in there. We have our official persona, and sometimes we have also other accounts that interface, maybe if it has to do more innovation or technology or something like that, where it's not official state sort of news or information. We can roll it over to one of the more appropriate personas.
Actually, that brings up one of my questions, which is what are the challenges of like communicating to all these different audiences? I mean, it seems like you guys have a lot of different kinds of interests and audiences coming from a lot of different corners of the population.
You do feel a little schizophrenic sometimes, I gotta tell you. You have to communicate something. You have to choose who am I speaking to, what's the best channel to reach them. So where it becomes kind of a gray area is this an official thing that the state of Israel is going to say, which is a huge responsibility before you hit send on that. Or is it a little edgier? Is it more innovative? Would it be more to maybe our other audiences? So it's kind of choosing the channel to make sure you're reaching the right audience, as well as keeping in mind you're representing a country when you're posting.
No pressure.
Well, we don't really tend to choose our audience, actually. Like each and every one of you, if you want to follow either the French consulate or myself on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, you can do that. So actually, we always exercise caution, because we represent the country, even on my personal account. Of course, I have pictures and videos of my kids at the zoo, and look at that, they are really, really funny, especially when my kids feed the giraffes. But we have to keep a certain quality in what we do. I mean, you will never see me binge drinking or doing really ridiculous things, unless someone took the pictures and not me. That's the difficulty with what we do. I mean, this is a personal account. I put some personal things, but always with a view to promoting, communicating, sharing information on the country I represent.
So along that line, because I think that, even though most of us, unless you can raise up your hand, do you represent a country? I can't say I do. The country of the Heiser family, maybe. But, it is important for us to look at who we're trying to reach and who's the audience, right? So I think that's a really good lesson for everyone, is to always be aware that anybody could be following us, right? It doesn't matter. And we're going to talk a little bit in a minute about the different types of things that maybe aren't so pleasant. We are going to talk about the challenges of like crisis and other kinds of trolls and things like that. But I want to start by talking about your plan for dealing with different kinds of things that might happen online. So what kind of plans do you have in place, and how do you work with your staff to make sure that you're representing the country well? And also, what kind of autonomy do you have in representing the country through your social channels?
Great question. We each have distinct roles and responsibilities, and those roles, and we'll talk about that probably later, shift during a crisis. So we know what we do. We have pretty fair autonomy. We've both been doing it for several years, and we kind of know the voice of our platform, or know what we can do. If it's a question like, should I post this or should I not? We always have the backing of, we can go to one of our diplomats and ask them their thoughts on it. But again, because I'm representing a country, I usually err on the side of conservative for that. In terms of some of the things we receive, as you might imagine, there's some very passionate issues around Israel and on the political side. So we get a lot of unpleasant messages and posts, and in general, we keep that conversation open unless it is blatantly hate speech or profanity. But if it's just disagreeing maybe with things, Israelis' policy, we generally let that stand.
Thank you, Kemi. We really use our social media to interact with our audience, and that's the added value, I would believe, over a website or a newsletter that you would open or you would receive, but you can't really comment on it. So here, indeed, we're exposed to interaction with the audience. Most of the times, it's really, really pleasant. We post these wonderful pictures about French historical sites, about our culture, about our food, about our wines. And we only have thumbs up. Yeah, that's great. I want to go there. I can't wait. Sometimes it's more unpleasant, and then we have to deal with it. And I think we're just have to play by the rules of the social media. We're there knowing risks that someone can take us on and just send us unpleasant messages that the whole community on the social media can read. And we play by the rules. I mean, if someone has some unpleasant comments on Facebook, if it is on my personal account, I engage with them. And if it's really over the board, I will just, I have the capacity to unfriend them. I have the capacity just, to block them. I did that only once. I've been in Houston for 2 years. I've been using the social media since almost they exist. After my birth, I can assure you. But I had to do that once, and it was after Charlie Hebdo. We had some comments about Jews, and you would certainly speak to that, Karen. And there the framework is very, very clear. It's prohibited, and it's a crime under French law to express certain ideas on Jews. So if you fall under the law, it's very clear for us that I had no other option but to do that. So sometimes we have to do it, but the bottom line is that we know the rules of the game and we play by the rules.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. I mean, let's bring it right back to this group. I mean, last month we had something similar happen here. I don't know if you noticed that, what happened last month, but in our Twitter stream, it was September 11th, and people were looking for trending hashtags, and you guys were trending like you normally are. And what ended up happening was some ISIS type people posted with our hashtag for the entire time. There was about 7 or 8 posts. I actually saved them all, screenshotted them, and blocked them. But what was interesting about that is that people will find opportunities to jump into your stream and put in their own thoughts. So bringing it back to you guys, and actually it was quite an interesting campaign. If you're interested in stuff like that, I can show you the screenshots. But they even had Twitter cards and everything. They were very sophisticated. So we blocked them, of course, because it was hate speech and it was awful, and it was spam in large part. So how do you handle stuff like that, Karen? Because I know you get a lot of that. So can you explain what you do?
That's an understatement. we have a lot of it, and terrorist groups are very savvy online, I can tell you that too.
I was surprised.
But in a way, I mean, consistent to what I've already said, but in a way, especially if it's something about happening in Houston, great, then thanks for giving us the heads up about a protest or something you're planning. But other than that, I mean, if it's just blatant death threats or anti-Semitic stuff, it's just part of working for a Middle Eastern country.
We're not a Middle Eastern country, so we're not exposed to that. And as I said, most of the times we have positive feedback and positive interaction with our audience. When we don't, and I give you an example, we have to exercise our judgment and we play by the rules. And the rules are very clear in some instances, even though, of course, the tally, the references or the cultural identity will be different here and in France. But most of the times, those difficult situations can be addressed according to a very well set of parameters, and that's what we do. Sometimes it doesn't fall under the power of the law, but it's still unpleasant. You know, you never like to have your personal views criticized, but more so when your personal views are official views and you have a duty to promote and defend them. So there we try to engage and correct misperceptions. And the easy thing to do is to go back to facts. Of course, everybody will dispute facts, but at the end of the day, you know, if people tell us we are a country where people don't work much, are very lazy, we're always on strike, and we're not very productive, and taxes are too high, it's very simple, because we have existing sets of international comparisons on that. So you just take them back to the facts. The productivity of labor in France is higher than in Germany. Working time is higher than in Germany or Israel. I don't know. You guys work a lot, right?
Yeah.
I wanted to add too that we have a lot of. We're also lucky to have mostly supporters of Israel in our Jewish community and outside of our Jewish community. And one of the things Lisa does a good job of doing is we call them. I mean, they're not brand ambassadors, but they're our supporters, and to kind of give them some rules of engagement to help guide them to not get caught up in some of this fiery conversation, to keep it intelligent, refer back to some of the actual sources like on our website or other official channels.
Yeah, and that's another thing that I was going to talk to you about, because we're going to go right into the crisis part of this, if you don't mind. So that's great when you're getting a one-off here, there, everywhere. But what happens when a big crisis occurs, like, oh, I don't know, a war or a conflict or something like that? What do you do then?
Okay, this is what we experienced. Some of you might remember there was a conflict between Israel and Gaza a couple of summers ago, not last summer, 2014, not last summer, it's summer before, it's all kind of a blur. So it was a crisis for 3 months, okay? So as I alluded to, all of our roles in our consulate change because everything gets amped up. You get more calls from supporters, crazy people, people worried about their family in Israel. You've got media calls nonstop. You need to be reporting back to Jerusalem what's happening. So everything is just at maximum capacity. It's all hands on deck. We all participate in our crisis communications, and we have a crisis communications plan that outlines how our roles are going to shift and kind of generally what we'd like to accomplish during the general day, although you don't know what the day holds. One thing also during a crisis with being diplomats, a lot of our people in our office are diplomats from that country. So when we're getting rocket alerts that rockets are being fired on cities and we're under intense stress for 3 months, you have to remember sometimes your coworkers are also worried about, that's where my mother lives, that's where my children live. So it's just incredibly intense, high pressure.
Since I arrived in Houston, I've only seen one crisis, quote unquote, which was the situation attached to Charlie Hebdo in France. But then the difficulty was not so much to turn into a crisis communication mode. It was to handle the only one directive we received from Paris, which was no communication. How do you communicate when you are instructed not to communicate? So that's a tough one. So what we decided to do is, of course, that number one, we declined all media solicitations. You can certainly imagine that all the media here in Houston were at my doorstep asking for reactions on what happened in France, and we declined that systematically. Number two, I informed relays in our community, because even though I cannot communicate and my officers at the consulate cannot communicate, those on whom I don't have authority are allowed to communicate. So we have elected officials, we have people working in the French-American Chamber of Commerce, we have people at the Texan French Alliance for the Arts, we have people at Houston Accueil, which is another French entity in town. We have our schools, the French schools in the country. So all these people were asked to react as well. So the second thing I did, after having strictly followed the instruction not to communicate publicly, was to share information with those people so that if they get asked, they would know our line. And our line was very simple, you know. Of course, we condemn, of course, the French law enforcement does everything they can to catch the culprits and neutralize the threat. And number three, there was a hatred on the freedom of speech, and the Jews as well line on that, and we expressed very clear line that it was not consistent with the values of the French Republic, and we also communicated on the fact that the French people got together. So those were the rough lines of communication that I shared with those people who were allowed to communicate. And myself, on my Facebook and Twitter accounts, I simply posted pictures with very simple messages, which were acts of communication nevertheless. For example, I snapped a picture of the consulate office with all the flowers and messages and testimonies we received from the American people, just to say in these difficult times, we have the support of our American people. So this was not really an act of communication. It was not expressing our position on what was going on in France, but I thought it was an important message to deliver as the Consul General of France here in this country, to show the support and solidarity we received in these difficult times.
Can I add one point that might be important? And I know your consulate is run the same way. When I started working for the government of Israel, I thought like an American. And an American, we think very organizational hierarchy. So I thought, okay, I answered to Washington, D.C. Embassy, and Washington, D.C. Embassy answers to Jerusalem. Really, we have a lot of autonomy. There's obviously the information coming out of Jerusalem, and but we need to know our audience in our 5 states and how to communicate what we need to communicate. The facts and the frequency of all of that is up to us. We're not dictated. Do 5 posts on Facebook. Do this post and this post on Twitter, or say this and don't say that. We're just kind of given the information and told it's up to you to make this happen in our 5 states. We also, to add to what you said, and Lisa does a good job of this too, we have different email lists and different segmented audiences. And we would also have conference calls, maybe with all our rabbis throughout the Southwest, because and our Christian leaders, because they want to know what to tell their congregations on the weekend. Or we give them facts in private, and we'd obviously meet with government leaders and give them, here's the facts that we have, so that they have actual official information.
And I really like what you guys are saying about that, because for us out here, one of the tips I'm taking from this is that, have a tribe, if you will, and communicate to them what your positions are in a not so public necessarily forum, so that they can also echo what you're saying or say it for you in the case of what Sujiro was saying. One of the things I did want to talk about too, besides war, and those kinds of crazy things where people go crazy, although unfortunately that's happening more in the United States too, is we talked a little bit about crisis during things like storms or weather events or other kinds of things where people are needing information. And Sujiro, I'm going to start with you because you talked about the tsunami, for example, as one example. But could you talk a little bit about how you managed those kinds of crises?
Well, I mentioned the way we managed the tsunami in Japan. It was the first case where we used our social media to a large scale to reach out to our community. What happened with the tsunami is that landlines didn't work for phones. Computers which were attached to a landline didn't work in Japan. So the only way we had to reach out to our community was through smartphones, because somehow these wireless networks still work. So we use that instead of sending mailing lists and giving instructions to the people to follow the guidelines they receive from emergency authorities in Japan. So that was one very efficient way to communicate. And I think it works in most developed countries, where now we don't have bulky computers anymore, but we have very powerful smartphones which are connected 24/7. So that's a very, very efficient way, and sometimes the only way to really share information. Of course, we can imagine that in the case of a hurricane, even those wireless communications might be down, but if they are still up, we can use them. The second thing is that also the social media was an extraordinarily powerful tool to exchange information on individuals. Because the main request we receive in case of such an emergency, which is life-threatening, is not really how the situation evolves, because traditional media can do that, but it's trying to locate and identify people, because their families, their friends, overseas or in France, are worried about them, and social media allow us to do that. You have one post saying, yeah, I'm safe, and then we can track that and verify that and just reassure the family members or the friends.
I just would echo everything he said. We have nothing new in that, but I would do a little different twist on it. Israelis are really good at handling crises, as you might imagine. So when there is something, a disaster somewhere in the world, they're also really good at being the first on the scene to render aid. And that goes for like in Nepal, to the floods here in Houston or tornadoes in Oklahoma. So we get to also kind of talk that, well, hey, we've got Israeli aid here. Who needs help? Because we're here to help, and we plug them in with the right organizations, and then kind of not promote, but let people know that they're here.
Right, they'll bring blankets and food. There's actually a private group that started during the floods. I'm actually on it from the Israeli perspective. It was an Israeli community that put it together to like answer people's needs during the flood. Like we were bringing them cleaning supplies, and all they had to do was ask, and they would do it. So it was pretty interesting to watch that in real time happen. And that's another thing that all of us can think about too for our companies and businesses, like what is it that could happen in your business, and are you ready? Have you actually planned for that? And do you have a plan? I mean, I know Karen has an amazing plan, right? So they have like everybody into action, but what I heard was she doesn't do it by herself, which I think is the big thing. You know, like if something happens in your business or in town, reach out, to people. And how many of you were here for Hurricane Ike? Yeah? How many of you were able to use your text messaging during Hurricane Ike? How many of you lost your power? Yeah. So, I mean, in some cases, it's really, as Sujiro said, the only way to communicate at that point in time. I mean, I was like charging my phone in my car. I don't know if you guys did that too, but we would drive around and charge our phones. It was bad. So, it can happen here. It can happen in Japan. It can happen anywhere. So that's a great point you made there. So give us, you were talking about a day in the life of a crisis situation. Can you give us like an idea of like what you go through during like, these kinds of days?
Well, usually, okay, you have to keep in mind too, there's a time difference. So I'm getting alerts, maybe starting, generally speaking, 3 o'clock in the morning, alerts of how many rockets are falling and where. over in the Middle East. And so I start reading those things and so that when I can get into the consulate, physically get into the consulate, I'm ready to talk with my diplomats about what I know, what they're seeing from cables from Jerusalem, what our messaging needs to be that day. We have, you answer media requests, you answer, everyone, it's all hands on deck. We have to update also at the same time. Update our websites, update our social media feeds with all what happened overnight for us, and respond to all the calls. Some of them are frantic people worried about their family in Israel or whatnot, so it's just kind of you hit the ground running first thing in the morning, and it doesn't stop. At least that's what it felt like for me for 3 months.
Okay, Camille, well, we don't really have to face life or death situations
Right.
here. Having said that, we are prepared for anything, and that's one of the basics of what we do. Anything can happen, and we will be expected to handle that. So we have a security plan, and in this security plan, we have a strong and robust communication section. So we know, well, we have assignments and we have backups for people to go to the situation room. We know who can feed our social media accounts, and we know who's going to be the backup for that. So that's what we do now. And I've been in this job for, since last century. At the beginning, we did not have that. In the case of crisis, we had security plans with assignments on the phone. So this person will answer the phone here, that person will answer the phone there. Now we really have to go and have something ready and prepared, and we must have everyone very, very conscious of their role vis-a-vis our social media and our social account because of the importance of it in a situation of crisis. And that's a real change. I would say 10 years ago, we did not have that.
I can't really discuss that, but just trust me, the Israeli security is top notch. I feel very safe working in the consulate.
Can we send somebody to my house? My goodness. It reminds me of like after 9/11 when I was living in Arlington, we had like the tanks sitting out on the highway as we drove by. It was crazy. So yeah, I mean, this is like really important to have this ready and prepared. I do want to open this up a little bit for questions. I do want to maybe come back a little bit to engagement as well, but does somebody have like a burning question or an interest about how to handle like social media channels for bigger?
I just wanted to mention, I really appreciate having you here, but I wondered, because we're global and you're in the US, there's a time zone difference, so how do you handle that from not being exhausted?
Okay, so she asked, how do you handle the time zone difference and not be exhausted? That's actually, you hit that a little bit, but I'll start with Sujiro on that.
Well, that's very simple. I am exhausted.
So it's a high stress time. So besides like not getting sleep, it's very stressful, intense, and every day you're not exposed to the most pleasant information or sites. So for me personally, it was important for me to exercise and keep with my spirituality and try to get a modicum of sleep as well.
Yeah. Okay, you can say something else.
I am exhausted, but there is one blessing we can take advantage of.
French wine.
Well, French wine is one of them. We have many others. But no, things happen first in France. I mean, we're on the right part of the time zone, right?
Yeah.
So if a situation develops in France, most likely, when it hits us, if it's overnight, we will have already messages and communication in place because it would have been handled in France. And in our case, we're even west of Washington. So the embassy has the lead, even though what you said is correct. I mean, I report to the ambassador, but in most cases, I report directly to the capital. But if something happens in France and we need to tailor-make a message on the US and France, for example, it will be handled in Washington. And by the time we wake up 1 hour later, most likely it will be ready. So that's the blessing.
And French wine.
Yeah, and bread. I'm sorry, and cheese. Okay, here we go. Cheese, bread, wine. Oh my goodness. The other thing, I guess you're counting your blessings that you don't, you're not the consul in Australia then, I guess.
Do you get involved in trade between countries where business groups or trade groups in France or Israel want to do business with people here?
So they were asking about trade. Do they deal with trade issues and people that want to do trade and businesses that are interested in trade?
We absolutely do that, but I work for, in the consulate is more of a diplomatic political focus with some of the outreaches we talked about earlier. We have a separate economic mission office that is completely focused on that.
Well, even though this is a consulate and the Consul General of France, economic diplomacy, we call it, is one of our top priorities, with maybe climate diplomacy this year, because we will be the host country to the Conference of the Parties of the United Nations Framework Conference on Convention on Climate Changes. But I did just that this week. I was in Austin, for example, where we had a visit from a group of startups from Montpellier in France. They wanted to come and find out what was this craze about Austin and new technologies. So we organized the event, and of course I reported that on my social media account. And in this case, it's a limitation, but I can get you into the integrities of our job. I have to do it myself because my staff, we don't have the resources to go and take 3 staff members to Austin. So very often, because this is a very large territory, and I cover it myself, very often when things are not happening in Houston, even the official feed of the consulate on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram will be fed by me.
That's great, yeah.
This one is specifically with Karen. Can you tell us a little bit about your digital engagement with the Latino audience?
So the question is, can you tell us about your digital engagement with the Latino audience?
I love that question because we sincerely try to do things, Hispanic outreach, just because the Hispanic community is so important in the Southwest United States. Online, I have a web page, a couple of web pages actually, dedicated in Spanish language, and it's not just translating things from English into Spanish. We'll have news specifically for the Spanish audience and in Spanish there. So you can get scoop on the Spanish pages. Also, I started about a year ago what I called like Spanish Saturday, because Saturday for Jewish people is the Sabbath day. So on Saturday, the Twitter feed is just only Spanish. And in looking at the analytics, which I am a data nerd, it really has picked up traction and is resonating. So I think that was a great validation of that.
Well, I speak French, Russian, Chinese, but not Spanish, so I can't tell you much about that.
Ironically, I only speak English and French.
That's amazing. So one of the things you just brought up, which I think is a good question, is how do you measure your success in social media channels? That would be a good one for both of you.
So actually, I know this is going to sound crazy, but I would make time, even during a crisis, to look at the data because, we're immersed in it, but everyone else is kind of going about their normal lives. So I wanted to be sensitive, like looking at our emails, how many are bouncing or not being open. Are we communicating too much? When do we stop communicating this much? I was looking at what kind of information was resonating on Twitter and what wasn't, so that we could fine tune that even throughout a crisis. So we're giving people what they needed to hear in the Southwest United States. And obviously in a non-crisis time, we do it regularly, just like clockwork.
Well, we have a quantitative and a qualitative approach. Every week, I have a weekly meeting with my staff, and we receive input on our social media, or the data, basically, the views, the shares, the retweets, and we know what worked and what worked less. And we use that to adjust and correct. And in addition to that, because that's only one share of it, I mean, you can put something absolutely ridiculous and funny and entertaining, and it will be shared, and people will view it, and it will be very successful, but it would not serve our purpose. as a diplomatic mission. So in addition to that, I like to interact with people in real life, not on digital media only. And very often when I travel to the far end of Texas, I went to El Paso, for example, people tell me, yeah, I saw what you did on Facebook, and this is not something you really know. So it works. And the real measure for success is how people react or behave with us in the real life, not on social media.
That's great. Other questions? Did I see any other hands? Yes.
So I think a lot of times, especially for you, Karen, we perceive, Israel for just the things that we hear on mainstream news, right? So I have two questions. One, what are some surprising facts about Israel that we typically wouldn't know about? And two, what are some of the fun perks of working in the job that you guys have?
And I don't have to repeat that because you're right by the mic. Anyone who's ever been to Israel is always shocked. And it's like, this is not what I saw in the news. They just see desert and destruction, I feel. I don't know. And so we do actively send people, journalists like Ariana, to Israel and to cover, for her to blog or whatever about it in Spanish and English. We send, if there's a conference there on Israel again for their innovation and technology, we'll send, reporters to cover that, and they come back with a new perspective and appreciation. And obviously, it's where the Bible comes alive. So we send a lot of, especially Christian communities there, and they can walk in the footsteps of Jesus Christ. And so it brings a different meaning, and it really endears them to the country. So I would encourage all of you guys to go there. It is not what you necessarily see on TV. It's very safe within the borders. Israeli is very good at keeping Israel safe. And to that point, we would have a regular, during crisis, when that was what you're always literally being bombarded with is just war and destruction news. We try to go beyond the headlines and do a deeper dive into the rich culture or some of mostly the wonderful things in Israel.
Well, you don't only take journalists and politicians there, you also take diplomats. So I was lucky enough to go for a diplomatic seminar on leadership in Israel at the beginning of the month, and I can tell you, yes, it's eye-opening and life-changing to see real things instead of just witnessing what you can get out from the media. You mentioned the perks, and you were curious about the perks of our job, so I can tell you everything is false. Yes, I have a diplomatic plate on my car, but no, I cannot speed. I will be stopped by the police as well as you will. Yes, I have a very nice residence with a French flag on in River Oaks, but no, it doesn't come for free. I pay rent for that. No, the best part in this job is to serve a great nation, France.
Ditto. Now they have opened up a CDP office for Israel in Houston. Great. I saw a hand kind of popping up over here. Yes?
Social media is so wonderful. You can use it to react to the conversation around you, or to proactively send it. So what percentage of your feed do you think would be?
So she was asking about the difference between proactively sending out messages versus reacting or maybe engaging might be a good point. So yeah, I mean, I guess she's asking how vibrant is your page at the end of the day? Like what are you just talking, or are people talking with you? You talked a little bit about that, Sujiro, already, but Karen?
You are absolutely right. Well, I'm a communications nerd. That's my background. I'm not a diplomat or politician. So two-way engagement and relating to your publics is key. And to what he says, whether that's in person or online, that's very, very important. And to me, engagement is the number one data indicator you need to look at.
Well, I'm here to engage, and that's what we do in real life and in social media as well. Indeed, I have staff, and I do myself feed our social accounts, our social media accounts. But also the way those instruments are built with the right set of parameters, you know when people mention about you, so you have the capacity to track that, to monitor that, and to react to that, and that's what we do. Not as much as we would like to, because we're very busy. I told you already I'm exhausted with what I do, so I can tell you I'm even more exhausted with what I don't do.
And he's here, so I'll give him that. Any other questions? Yes, in the back.
Can you talk about contact generation, content generation, and we have difficulty generating content and just wondering how you guys handle that?
That's a very good question. She asked, how do they handle getting content from different parts of the organization, and sort of how do you handle generating content?
I love that question because you may have seen in the news this year, not so much as a war crisis, but we were dealing with, Israel had a very strong position regarding the deal with Iran. And I think Americans can only listen to that so much and listen to the facts, and that got saturated in terms of communicating, here are the facts, here's what we don't like about the agreement and what our concerns are. So we wanted to go beyond or combine what was being sent to us from Israel or the embassy. So we went out and did videos of people in Southwest United States, Houston, and asked them what they thought and created kind of a video campaign of that. So that to get people's opinion on Iran. And in asking them to do the video, it gave us an opportunity to engage with them and talk about, well, this is, they'll say, well, what is going on, or I'm not sure about this. So we were able to make them aware as well and feel passionate about the issue.
Well, there are two sources of content, or I would divide it into two categories. A very simple one, time-consuming but very simple. We are, especially on our official pages, an official body. So you track the right news feeds or timelines from official bodies in France, and you retweet that, you share that, you relay that, and that's easy because it's just about setting the right parameters. What is more difficult is to create original content. And there, social media are not different from real life. We have priorities. I set the priorities for my staff, for my institutions, for those people who work with me. I tell them we want to work on economic diplomacy, promote business, economy, trade, investment between the US and France. Number two, we want to raise the profile of France here. So we have to promote French culture, education, wine, cheese, bread, whatever you say, and it works, you see? And number three, because we are the host country of COP21, the Global Conference on Climate Change, I want my staff to also have a strong line on climate change. And I can tell you it's a little bit challenging here in Texas. But on the one hand, yes, we have existing news feeds, and we tap into that. On the other hand, and it's more difficult, we create our own content to promote our economic diplomacy, to promote the profile of France and how we can help raise that, and to promote our action in the context of climate change. In this perspective, I decided to start a series of videos here, for example. We call them success stories. French entrepreneurs, artists, scientists who succeed in Texas, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. And that's really an original content. We go, we shoot the videos, we edit them, we put them online. And the idea is to show that France, this part of the nation, is not only about wine, food, fashion, but also we have wonderful businessmen, we have top-notch scientists, and we have marvelous artists. And for the other side of the coin, I also want to send a message to my fellow citizens, to the French who would be in France and would have equally biased perceptions about Texas, that yes, you will find cowboy boots and hats, it will be about oil and gas, and yes, the movie or the TV series was shot in Dallas, but no, you also have a great culture, great business opportunities, and great opportunities in the field of science and technology as well. So that's what we do. We try to produce our own content.
For me, that's interesting because Sujiro was talking about from a top down because he heads up his organization. So having somebody at the top that really like supports content is really, really important. But from Karen's point of view, she's coming from the communications point up. I mean, do you have a lot of other people in your organization and around, like not just in your communications team, helping you with getting the content?
So we have different outreach areas like academic and cultural, and we have a cultural attaché. We have an academic officer. So I want to take, for example, our academic officer goes to SMU. We will, whatever engagement she has there, that's posted on her specific academic channels, as well as we would sometimes repurpose it on our general Israeli channels. And same thing with culture. If it's just very, very a cultural thing, well, he might talk about it only on his channel. But if it's an event that anybody and everybody might want to attend, we might cross promote that on our general Israeli channels as well.
So that's it. Okay, yeah, I think we both got it. So I think I have time for one more question because we're coming to the end of our time, believe it or not. We are chewing through, but yeah.
I just wanted to expand on what Frank was talking about, because I think you're right.
Could you come do that here? Because there's actually an online audience too, so come on, Lisa. Just join us. I'll give you my chair and everything.
Yeah.
Oh, look, we have a gentleman
She's great.
coming up here. Yeah, Sujiro, such a gentleman. Thank you.
I just wanted to briefly expand on what Karen was saying, is that since it can be really difficult for content when you have a really broad base, it's like not everyone cares about our academic attaché going to SMU. So we created all of these different personas, but obviously that doesn't work for everyone. But it was just a way that we felt was easier for us to address our audiences, because again, people who are following our Facebook page probably don't care that our academic attaché met some students at SMU, but the students at SMU really, really care. So that was just one of the ways that we found that reaching audiences across many different platforms and lots of demographics was easier for us to split it kind of along that craft. So it doesn't work for everybody, but it works for us because it is, again, very, very specific. So.
See, I'm so lucky when I like have zero sleep for 3 months that Lisa is like, so I don't have to worry about that at all. So having a good team is invaluable.
Right, and getting people on your team, you know, like going out and recruiting them to understand the value of social media. I mean, we have people from the very top of an organization, you know, like the Consulate of France that see this very clearly. I hope you guys saw that today, how clearly he sees the value. So could we give him a hand for joining us today? Thank you so much, guys. A few announcements that I need to make, and you can actually shut this down for me on Google Hangouts. Hi, guys. We hope we